All right, so today's lecture is going to be on the president's actual function. So last class we basically talked about what you have to do to be president. What are your requirements? Age 35, 14 years of residency, being born a citizen, all those fun things, and some of the nitty-gritty involved in each of those requirements. Today we're going to talk about, well, what do you do once you get the job? What is your job as president? What roles do you play? And there's definitely more than one. Most people think, oh, they're the president. That's a very broad category for a whole lot of authority that's vested into you by the Constitution and also just by a matter of fact and how the president's job interacts with political parties and political machines and all those kind of fun things. So today, if you really want to categorize this lecture, it's what does the president do? And this is broad concepts, not nitty-gritty kind of stuff, so I'm not going to tell you how they sign a bill or anything like that, but I'm going to tell you the basics of their roles in our country and outside with regards to foreign policy. So first of all, they have constitutional powers, and not shockingly by the name, these are powers that are just mentioned directly in the Constitution, things that the president does because the Constitution says so. The main job, they carry out laws passed by Congress, or in a way they enforce laws passed by the legislature. Now, this might sound very simple, okay? Congress passes a law, president signs it, it's now a law, the president's job is to enforce it. And that was the view for a very long time. As time has gone on, there's one camp of people that say if the law is passed, the president has a sworn duty to uphold and enforce that law. Another camp has popped up and said, well, now maybe the enforcement of the law is almost like a check on the power of the legislature. Maybe the president can choose not to enforce laws that he doesn't like or she doesn't like. It's all been he's, though. I'll say he from now on because Hillary didn't win. But it's always been that case where, okay, are we going to enforce this law or are we going to not enforce it for some political or power reason within the executive branch? A good example would be marijuana laws under Obama. Now, Obama basically put out an edict or like basically a statement on policy saying that he's not going to enforce federal marijuana laws on low-level pushers, people who have like a few ounces or even up to a pound, I think, of marijuana. He was like, we're not going to worry about those guys. They're not a big deal to us. It kind of took dispensaries and people in California where it's legal under state law, took them out of the running for major busts, that kind of stuff. Now, one side of the camp is saying, well, the law is marijuana is against federal law. So the federal government, through the executive branch and the president, should enforce that law and arrest those who break it. The other side is, well, Obama doesn't like this law, thinks it's bad policy, and says, I'm only going to enforce it against the big guys coming out of Mexico and South America where there's a lot of drug and crime and death and destruction as a result of it. I'm not going to go after a mom and pop dispensary in Colorado or California. So that's that equilibrium, that balance that's changed over time. Early on, it was, all right, their job is to enforce the law. If the president hates the law, they still enforce it. Now that's become almost like a check on the power of the legislature. So if the legislature makes the law, or let's say they overturn an executive veto, and the president really hates the law, maybe the president will just say, you know what, I'm just not enforcing that one. Now, the Congress, in response to that, could say, fine, we're not going to give you any money, which means that they can't do anything. So the Congress does have some weapons at their disposal, and you start seeing things like government shutdowns happen as a result. But overall, the main job of the president is to enforce laws passed by Congress, but there is some variance over time in what that means to carry out those laws. Other powers, they veto legislation. That's a big power, so that's one of the checks and balance system the executive branch has over the legislative branch. Congress can call Congress into special session. This is warfare. This is like a disaster's happened. We need everybody to talk. This is demanding a declaration of war against Japan for Pearl Harbor. This is post 9/11 Patriot Act kind of stuff, getting Congress back in session when they're not normally in Washington, D.C. for some major event. And they also receive foreign officials. And that's more of a ceremonial power. Their job is to say, hey, I'm a head of state, and so are you, and we're going to talk together because we're equals. They basically receive each other. By constitutional law, the president has to give a State of the Union address. And early on, the State of the Union was not we're going to stand up in front of everybody and like do standing ovations every 5 minutes like you recently would have seen early in the year, each year the president's in office. Early on, it would just be a letter or a speech written out or a statement of policy written out that the newspapers would then put into print and send out to everybody. Woodrow Wilson, I believe, was the first president to really make it into an event. And like, this is not just the State of the Union, like I'm going to put a legal document in front of you saying, here's the State of the Union, here's what I want to get done. This is a real deal. We're going to make this fanfare and festive and basically just promote the policy. And the policies can change. So the idea of the State of the Union is, well, I'm going to put forth the platform and agenda of my administration for the next year. And that can have a big change in 6 months. George Bush was elected November 2010, sworn in 2001 in January. 6 months later, he was probably thinking, all right, my policy is probably going to be something like, I'm going to work on the economy. I'm going to work on bringing back credibility to the White House after the Monica Lewinsky scandal with Bill Clinton, yada, yada, yada. Cut to September 11th, boom, all of a sudden, that State of the Union is no longer about the economy. It's about the war on terror and the necessary to go fight them over there, so we're not fighting them over here, all that kind of stuff. It can change very quickly, but the idea is it puts forth a general plan of the administration in the executive branch for that coming year. Next thing, he is the chief executive, and it's almost, in a way, it's a lot like a business. So Trump's in there now. In addition to being commander-in-chief of the armed forces and those kind of, in the political party leader, those kind of roles, there are 15 executive departments, DOD, Department of State, Department of Education. They employ about 3 million government workers, and that number goes up and down as like there's austerity and things being cut off and funding being jacked up or lowered down. But the idea is this: a lot of people. He's basically the boss of 3 million people who have nothing to do with the military. This is not the military, although the DOD is involved. This is the civilian side of the executive branch. This is not anybody with a rank on their shoulder or on their arm. This is just people like you and me who got jobs with the federal government and the executive branch. It's a lot of people who govern and keep control over. He appoints the heads of the cabinet positions. So those 15 executive departments, he appoints those guys. He says this is who they're going to be, and the Senate has to approve them. Now, the reason the Senate approves them historically is, one, it's in the Constitution, that's what happens. Secondly, the reason behind it is, think about a situation like, let's say a president gets elected. That's an election. It's indirect through the Electoral College, but at least there's still some direct vote involved. The president's now in office, but he might want to appoint someone that nobody likes, that would have never made it into office. So if you don't have the Senate there to kind of put the kibosh on that and stop it from happening, the president could be a wonderful person and then appoint terrible, awful people to the office, basically become like a figurehead president and appoint a bunch of lackeys down below who are just taking our rights away and doing terrible things. The Senate process is the check on the executive branch to stop those kind of shenanigans from happening. Also appoints federal judges, and this is important because they serve for life, and he appoints all federal judges, so bankruptcy court judges, any judges involved at the Supreme Court, the appellate court, the district courts, anyone involved with copyright acts, all those judges and magistrates, they all get appointed by the executive branch and the president, and they're all subject to senatorial approval just like the cabinet heads. So again, these are lifetime appointments with the exception of bankruptcy judges who will, I think, serve 15-year terms. But all their judges, lifetime tenure. They can't get thrown out of office basically unless they commit a crime, they die, or they go senile and can't do the job anymore. That's about it. As long as they're sane, law-abiding, and not dead, they're staying in that office. So they're not moving. That's a huge power. So that's why it's checked by the senatorial approval process. And this is a quick layout, so if you want to pause it here just to get a good look at it, it's just a basic layout. And this is old data, guys. This is from 2001. This is before 9/11. So this is from May 2001. So guess what? A lot of this has changed. The DOD is much larger now. The Veterans Affairs, they've gone up because of their scandals. Education has gone up and down over time. It might be going way far away. Energy's gone up and down with Obama being a very pro-energy, pro-green president, so that's gone up. It's just, this fluctuates, and it's more now than it used to be. As the chief executive, he can issue what's called an executive order. And now this is something kind of cool because it's a law without being a law. Laws have to go through the how a bill becomes a law. Let's just think like Schoolhouse Rock. They go through that long step-by-step process, and the idea is that, well, if it gets through the whole process, it's probably a good law because it could have been killed 15 different ways from Sunday by the time it got to the president's desk. So there's lots of ways to make that happen. An executive order is just the president writing something down, and then it has the force of law behind it until somebody tells him you can't do it. When the Supreme Court tells them you can't do that, it's unconstitutional. It can be for things that are silly, like today's going to be Michael Jordan Day. It can be for very big, important issues, like we're going to go ahead and make a bunch of illegal immigrants legal because that makes most sense and is how I'm going to control the border as the president, which is my job. They can also do terrible things like during World War II, like interning people of Japanese ancestry into camps because we're afraid they might be spies. That was an executive order. The most famous executive order in history is probably one you've heard about. The Emancipation Proclamation was an executive order freeing all people held in slavery in the rebelling states, not Kentucky or West Virginia or Maryland, but in the rebelling states that had slavery, they freed those slaves. It was an executive order. So there's a lot of power there. Executive orders can also be overturned by the courts, so there isn't an unlimited power. So Obama's executive order that basically gave amnesty to a whole lot of illegal immigrants, that the Supreme Court said you can't do that, and that was undone. The president can issue pardons, and this was one of those weird powers that's basically unlimited. But it's only for federal crimes for the president. Governors can issue pardons for state crimes. So if you commit the state crime of murder, the governor can pardon you. But murder is also a federal crime, so the president would also have to pardon you for you to be off scot-free. You can also be pardoned for past actions that haven't been prosecuted. So, like if Obama were in office and said, well, I like Hillary, so I'm going to make sure that nothing happens to her. She's pardoned for anything relating to emails or anything scandalous related to Benghazi, whatever has been in the news lately. He could have done that. He didn't, but he could have as president. It's almost unlimited. No one can stop a pardon from happening. Now, a president cannot pardon you for a state crime. So if, let's say you're in Georgia and you commit the state crime of murder, Obama or Trump now could pardon you for the federal crime of murder, the national level law that you broke when you killed someone, but they cannot give you any kind of amnesty or pardon for that Georgia crime. So if you kill someone in Georgia, you got to get a pardon from the United States president and from the governor of Georgia. Don't kill anybody. All right, reprieve. A reprieve is a delay in punishment, or it's also a shortening of a sentence. So let's say you've been sentenced to the death penalty at the federal level or at the state level, because governors can give reprieves as well, but only for state level crimes. Let's say you committed murder and you're in federal prison and you're on death row. The president say, you know what? I'm going to give you a reprieve, only life in prison. It's considered a lesser offense. You're still going to die in prison, but they're not going to put a needle in your arm and kill you. That's the idea behind it. It lessens the sentence or it delays the imposition of a sentence. A reprieve can be issued for someone on death row at the last second saying, stop the execution, we're going to do one last investigation. But then if something comes through, boom, you're still on the chair and you're gone. The basic idea behind it is it's a way to pardon somebody or alleviate a sentence. One thing Obama was doing a lot of was basically offering reprieves or clemency sentences for people who had been in prison for a long, long time for nonviolent drug offenses. So basically people who are selling drugs with no guns, no crime, no real violence going on, what we call in the legal world victimless crimes, quote, around victimless. The idea being, well, they're in there for reason A, but you know what, times have changed. People don't go to jail for 20 years because they have a pound of pot on them. They go to jail for 20 years because they got 3 pounds of heroin on them. Like, just the standard over time has changed. So Obama was like, well, I'm going to lower that. Now, that is not without its controversy. Some people are like, you cannot do that. You can't sit there and pick and choose which crimes you like the most and then give clemency to the people that happen to fit the bill. And others are like, well, maybe he's doing a good thing because the prisons are overpopulated with nonviolent offenders. It's a big news topic, and it becomes a political football after a while. And then finally, you have what's called amnesty. Amnesty is basically a pardon for a large group of people. So amnesty can be like, all right, all people in the country illegally are now legally here. Boom, that's amnesty. I'm forgiving them. They're no longer in trouble for it. All the people who dodged the draft during the Vietnam War, burned their draft cards, or ran away to Canada or Mexico so they wouldn't have to serve in the military, I'm going to give them a reprieve. I'm going to give them amnesty. They're all pardoned. They can come back and do work and be productive in society. It's just like a gigantic pardon. Commander-in-Chief powers. The president is in charge of all branches of the armed forces, whether it's Coast Guard, Air Force, Army, Marines, Navy, whatever. They're in charge of it. If a new branch comes up, let's say they make teleport troopers and they call it the teleport trooping branch, whatever. Guess what? He's in there too. Now, there's nothing in the Constitution about an Air Force, but guess what? Because it's considered a branch of the armed forces, which is a very broad term, it includes any new armed forces, which would include things like the Air Force, which didn't come into existence until after World War II. You still, as president, get control of that new branch, even though it wasn't technically known of at the time of the writing of this big, important Constitution document we're all focusing on today. Now, Only Congress, as a legislative body, can actually declare war, but only the president can order troops into battle. So we have an issue. The Constitution says that the president has the power to command. He's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That's pretty much all it says. It doesn't say when he can go into battle. It doesn't say, is it only for war, or is it just whenever he needs to move them? Can he not only move them with Congress's approval? So there's 2 to 3 camps in this idea of commander-in-chief. One camp is the president has complete authority to move troops wherever they want to. The other one says Congress has authority to basically just approve what the president does, but the president can't do everything. And then there's like a third camp that says, okay, the president can move troops, but only for a little while, and Congress kind of has to approve it after a certain point. And that middle ground has kind of won the day with what we call we'll skip that one, we call the War Powers Act. Now, we've only declared war in this country 5 times. 200 and some odd years later, the centennial was 1976, so 200 and almost 50 years later, we've only done it 5 times. The last time we did it was World War II. Vietnam was not a declared war. The Civil War was not a declared war. When you declare war against another country, you're doing 2 things. One, you're saying we are at war, and that you are a country that we're at war with. If Abe Lincoln during the Civil War had declared war against the Confederate States of America, he would have been simultaneously saying, we're going to go kill you, and we're saying that you are another country. The moment you do that, you open up a whole geopolitical world of, are there allies? Are there not allies? Am I going to be... can the southern states now join up with England, or they can join up with Spain or some other sympathetic country to slavery? Or can they join up with... Or do we ally with somebody else maybe down in Mexico or in the Caribbean for ships and stuff? You don't want to open that can of worms. So there's never been a declared war on terrorism. There's never been a declared war on ISIS. The idea is ludicrous, one, because you don't want to acknowledge that as a state. You don't want to acknowledge that group of people as their own governing body, because the moment you do, you open them up to the possibility of, by declaring war, you just legally recognized us as a country. So now not only are you going to kill us, you're saying we are who we've been saying we are as an Islamic State. So we don't declare war against entities that we don't want to acknowledge as countries. It's a very legalese kind of deal with what declaration of war is. Now, the shooting people, blowing people up, nuking people, that side of, we call it warfare. That is not war, that is warfare. That's the actual act we're taking as the chief executive and the commander-in-chief. That's what the president does. He is making war. He's not declaring war. He's blowing things up through his orders and everything else and his subordinate generals, but he is not declaring war. So enter the War Powers Act. Basically what this does is it curtails that side that says the president has unlimited power to move troops and do what he wants to for as long as he wants to. The War Powers Act says the president can move troops, but he has to notify the Congress immediately when they're sent into battle. And troops cannot be deployed for more than 60 days unless Congress approves it. That way the executive is checked by the Congress. And this is not in the Constitution. This is an act of law by Congress. And this is something that could be challenged, although it never has been. And I believe the fear is that if the Congress challenges it, the Supreme Court might come back and say, yeah, this act's unconstitutional. The president has unlimited access to this power. He can do whatever he wants. The president doesn't want to sue on this, because if he sues it, they might say, oh yeah, by the way, you don't have any power. Like, Congress has to approve everything you do. The War Powers Act is unconstitutional because it doesn't go far enough. Constitutionally, they get to do everything. So both sides are kind of in this little legal stalemate where neither side wants to sit there and fight over this war issue, because if they lose, they stand to lose more than they have now. So they're just kind of stuck in this weird purgatory of, okay, who's more in charge of troops? Is it the president or is it Congress with declaring war with the War Powers Act? And we still, to this day, don't have a firm answer on what it means. All we know right now is the president follows this rule. He deploys troops, notifies immediately, and doesn't keep them there for more than 60 days without approval. So this law has been followed, although it's never been challenged. So that might be something in the news in the next 10, 15 years. The president is the legislative leader. And not just for one party. It's not like Trump is now the Republican legislative leader. He's the legislative leader for everybody. The chief job of the executive branch and the president is to enforce law. So it makes sense that the president has some kind of influence over what those laws might be. Not just because a president should be okay, I want this law to be passed because I like this. It's, I want this law to be passed because I like this, but I want it to be passed this way so that I can more easily enforce the law you're putting on the books. Because there's nothing worse than Congress spending millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of man hours passing a law, getting it signed into law, and then the president says, you didn't give me the tools I needed to actually implement this law. You told me all these great ideas, and then you didn't fund it, or then you didn't do this or that, or now I have to go through this whole long paperwork process to make something happen that could have happened with a snap of my fingers before. So you want the executive involved because it's their job to enforce laws. So you want them inside the process so they can guide and try to help it along and make sure that the law is implemented in a way that is functional for the executive to enforce. Now, the president does this in a lot of ways. There's the hands-on approach where he has this little army of lawyers who all get in there and try to draft legislation with members of Congress, and they do. So, like, every time you see laws being debated, there's a lawyer from the executive branch over there talking to somebody else trying to make things happen. The president will also make speeches. The State of the Union's often used for this. Obama did at Rose Garden speeches to doctors talking about trying to promote Obamacare. It's fairly typical ideas to build support for these programs, but there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work with executive branch lawyers trying to get laws passed in ways that are most effective for the executive branch. The president is also, these are kind of small level roles. The president's the head of state. The head of state is like the person who says, well, I'm the chief executive of the United States of America. That means I do all the ceremonial stuff that comes along with that. You know how like a king knights people in monarchies? Well, the president, he's going to go shake hands with whoever wins the NCAA tournament. He's going to meet other foreign leaders. He's going to like do a bracket like Obama used to do when he was in office for the NCAA. He does things that are ceremonial in nature, have no real lawmaking authority. They're photo ops. It's let's say, hey, I'm the chief executive, and this is important to us because we're Americans. We love basketball. So he's going to shake Roy Williams' hand and go, this is a good thing for America that he won, or that we're promoting this education and college and this athleticism and like just excellence. Basically, he's coming out as the head of state saying, this is valuable to Americans. This is us right here. We are Americans, and this is what we like. Chief diplomat. This is a lesser function, not because it's not important, but because usually the president delegates this down. The president appoints ambassadors. So people that are in other countries basically represent the interests of the United States in that country. So we have ambassadors to Saudi Arabia, like in this picture. We have ambassadors to Australia who promote American interests there for like tourism and stuff. We have ambassadors who talk to all the Middle Eastern countries, all of Europe, all those folks. The president doesn't do that on a day-to-day basis. He makes calls, obviously, for big issues, but he's not sitting there worried about what the chief executive of Lithuania is doing that day. That might not be a call he's going to take, but he'll appoint somebody whose job it is to know exactly what's going on in Lithuania every single daggone day. He's basically delegating that authority out down to subordinates. But at some level, sometimes, a king comes to visit the U.S., like King Abdullah in this picture, and the president comes and meets him and says, we're both heads of states. We're co-equals. You are the head of your country. I'm the head of my country right now. That's how they handle it. It's basically a ceremonial acknowledgement of equal authority among two equals in political power. The president is the economic leader. Every single president, every single year through his executive office, puts forth a budget idea. Now, when Obama was in office his last 2 terms, the Democrats did not have control of the Congress. So guess what? Every time he put forth a budget, most of it didn't make it in because they were an adversarial group. When they were together, his budget had a big influence. So right now, Trump is a Republican. The Congress is all Republican. His budget that Trump puts out is going to have a huge influence on the budget overall. It's going to have a lot of what Trump's ideas are going to make it in that budget just because the parties are all homogenous. They're all the same people. They're all the same party. If it becomes switched in 2 years, guess what? The budget's not going to go through the same way. But every single year, the president always puts out a budget, even knowing that a lot of that won't make it in, because the president wants to say, hey, you see that thing you just did, that budget you passed that got messed all up? I tried to fix it, and you just poo-pooed on all my ideas. So they always put their idea out because it's true of sales. You can't hurt by putting forth your idea. The worst that's going to happen is they'll say no. If you don't do anything, the worst they're going to say to you is that you were negligent and inactive. So it's best to put out your idea, have them smack it down, and then have them come back and later say, why didn't you fix it? And you can say, well, I already did try to fix it. You just didn't take my idea. So you got Bush holding up that little budget like iPad thing. Guess what? The president will always put out a budget. Even if he knows that it will not go through, he'll still put out that budget because it's such an important thing that a president's going to do, because that budget is going to shape how he does his policy. If he wants to do X, Y, and Z against the war on terror, and then the budget only includes enough money for X and Y, guess what? The president can't do Z. If there's no money for it, it doesn't get done. And that's the issue. The president has things he wants to get done in his administration. If Congress doesn't put money in the budget for it, the president doesn't get it done. It just doesn't happen because there's no money to make that. There's no money to build a wall. There's no money to put troops in here. There's no money to develop this new kind of bullet or this new kind of gun. All that stuff is just not there anymore because the budget did not put those funds they weren't allocated out to the president. The president is the party leader for whatever party he identifies with. So in our case right now, Trump is a Republican president. Guess what? That is the highest office in our country, and he's Republican. It's called de facto representation. You are, of a matter of fact, Latin, de facto the leader of your party. Even though there's technically someone who's in charge of the RNC, Trump's in charge. Trump is the boss. He is the highest elected official. If you want to make money with campaigning and everything else, you go to Trump and say, will you come give a rally or a speech in Tennessee? I'm trying to get elected to Congress. And he'll be like, all right, I like you. And then he'll go to Tennessee and do a rally and try to drum up support for this fellow party member. It's a huge job. Bush did it, and Bush has done it. Obama really did it because he's an expert campaigner and drumming up support. He did it for Clinton. You had people coming out for Trump who were already in politics. So you had people like Paul Ryan, hit or miss supporting there, but the idea is that the party kind of comes together and supports their own. Well, guess what? When you're president, you have a lot of influence because all you have to do, especially if you're Trump, is tweet. You send out a Twitter message, and all of a sudden you might get campaign donations for some random congressman from Alabama who wouldn't have otherwise been known about. Or the president can show up for a speech, and then you're raising money that way. The president can highlight people and bring attention to people that he wants to bring attention to. And that is the entire presentation, guys. So make sure your notes are completed out. If there's any questions you have, just you can talk to me in class, or you can send me an email. Both will work. Thank y'all for watching. Please feel free to watch these videos again. There is a theory in education that if you hear it 7 times, you might get it. If you read it 7 times, you might get it. If you write it down 7 times, you might get it. But if you do all 3 at the same time 7 times, you're going to get it. So just make sure these are available for you. You can re-watch them, re-listen to them, refill out the notes if you want to. Just practice. Know these terms, know the impact they have, and good luck to you.